Jones, we should have known.
What's that?
I went back and I listened to Jim Tanner's previous interview on the Carolina Insider, which was, I think, February 9th of 24.
Yeah.
By Zoom.
That was on Zoom. We have a much better version this time.
We should have known. As I went back and listened to it, I thought, you know what? He kind of sounds like he could maybe be a GM in today's college world. And that was what happened just a few months later. So Jim Tanner's here with us in Pod World headquarters. Thanks so much for coming by.
Thanks for having me.
So what is GM world like in college sports today? What have these last few months been like?
Pretty hectic, very busy. So I guess I was hired in February and the portal opened in March. And so, you had to move down here and get set up. I had a bad back at the same time, so I was trying to navigate that and, finding a place to stay. And so, trying to prepare for the portal. So it's been pretty much nonstop since I first got here, but it's been fun. It's been, very exciting. And so, but yeah, it's been very busy.
All right. I have a ton of questions, but I just want to start with why was this an attractive position for you? You had a very successful business. You were doing really well in your professional life, and minus the bad back, I'm sure you were doing great in your personal life. So why was this an opportunity that you wanted to take?
It's really all about Carolina. I love this place. I mean, as I said before, obviously I graduated from here. Both my kids went here. So it's just a really special place. And so when I heard about the opportunity of them hiring a GM, I said that I couldn't imagine a better job, a better position. And it's really from a sense of purpose. I had been an agent for about 28 years. And so, I had a sense of purpose from that. But it was more related to some of the older guys that I had worked with. And, the more recent stuff didn't feel quite the same in terms of really serving the greater good. And so, when this opportunity came along, it just said something to me, and it just felt like I could give back in a way that, I otherwise couldn't, being an agent. And so I just, really wanted to jump on the opportunity.
What is that way that appealed to you? What do you feel like this accomplishes for the greater good that you're able to work on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there was a need here. And so I felt that my background and skill set and relationships could be very helpful here. Obviously, you come in, it's a very collaborative environment. And so I don't want to overstate what I do as compared to everybody else. But I just thought the skill set would lend itself to, the evolution of where college basketball was going. It's interesting. It's, the newly created position. And so we're kind of figuring out as we go in terms of what the roles and responsibilities are and how expansive that is. But I just felt like a lot of my background in terms of negotiating contracts, recruiting players and their families, representing players and families would translate very nicely to this role.
So Carolina football has a GM, women's basketball is a GM, baseball is a GM, but these roles aren't all necessarily exactly the same from one program to the next. For example, Michael Lombardi, the GM for football, is classified as a coach in however that is done. So he is allowed to go out and recruit, but you're not necessarily going to see players play. Is that correct?
At this point, no. It may evolve into that, but at this point, I'm not doing that.
Right, and that's because the role, you can't do that at this point in time. Is that right?
Correct. Generally, yeah.
So how do you identify guys to talk to? How does all that process work?
Again, it's it's a team effort. And so the coaches have input in terms of who they like and who they want us to investigate. We also have Buzz Peterson working with us, who obviously a longtime assistant GM and scout in the NBA. We've got TJ Beisner, and we just hired a new young man, Boris Sudniak, as a data analyst. And so we all kind of collaborate and put together names. A lot of it also is just the relationships that you have with various agents and agencies. And so you reach out to them to find out, which clients they would recommend for us and which ones they think kind of fit our program. And you go from there. And so you just, amass a universe of all the information, all the people that you want to try to look at and, consider, and then go from there.
When you were on with us before, you talked about in your agency life, you felt like you had been pretty successful at identifying what you called your kind of guys and building a stable of those. How have you translated those abilities to, because everyone who's come in here from this year's team has talked about how this is a good group of guys that seems to get along really well. Mm-hmm. They really want to win. It sounds like a team that you would have liked in your agency life. How have you brought those things to this role?
Well, I think first it starts with Coach Davis. I mean, obviously, like he really cares about character, and that's something that we're going to evaluate. So you're looking not only at what they can do on a basketball court, but how they're going to conduct themselves off the court as well in the community. And so when we look at this roster, like I'm really excited about it from a basketball perspective, but equally excited from a character perspective. They're really, really good guys. The chemistry has been off the charts in terms of the way that they've gotten along with each other. And so, I think that's a huge part of a roster and success. And so hopefully that translates into wins as we go forward.
All right. You mentioned kind of right when you got here, all of a sudden the portal opens a couple of weeks later. And I imagine it was kind of drinking from a fire hose in those first couple of weeks. And it's still a landscape that everybody's trying to figure out. But what did you learn? What did you not know that you now know, just that you went through those first couple of months that you were trying to get your arms around all of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a brand new world, right? And so, it's like just because I have experience, for 28 years in the pro ranks doesn't mean that, college is the same. It's very different. And so, a lot of it was first impression and just learning. And again, like it was drinking from a fire hose because we didn't have a lot of time to prepare for this portal. So again, the teamwork, the assistant coaches, Coach Davis, TJ, Buzz, we all just kind of collaborated and worked together in terms of, kind of jumping in and trying to identify talent that we wanted and then trying to persuade them to come here. And so, I think we did a great job kind of given the circumstances and the abbreviated time frame. But we're really excited about this roster.
As you look down the road and you can think about some teams when you don't have to assemble them in like the 4 months, what kind of things do you want to have in place to make that more of a process that is less frenzied than what you had to do the first go around, just as you kind of lay down the foundation for what Carolina basketball is going to be in the future.
So, I think it's identifying the players that are going to be most effective in Coach Davis's system. I think that's number one. I think having time to really evaluate everyone and to really have an assessment as to, who we like, what their market value might be, who's represented by, agencies that we'd love to do business with. And so, it's really just having time to prepare for it. So you're not just doing it over the course of a month or two, but you're really doing it over the course of the year.
I have heard just Coach Belichick on the football side of this talk about the volume of players, and that is a big change to him. He said, okay, hey, you knew who the 500 free agents were going to be or whatever the number is in the NFL. He says, I don't know who the free agents are going to be because of the way the portal works. So how does that work? Like, I mean, I imagine you go, oh, he's a good player, but you can't then just call him up and be like, hey, come to North Carolina. So how do you start that process of trying to figure out even who is available? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think you identify who the most talented players are.
Sure.
Who we think would fit here. And then you just monitor them and just make sure you keep an eye out for them. And then, when it's appropriate to have conversations with their agents and them, then we do it at that point. But we're prepared for it, before we get there.
So, I mean, would it be realistic that you may have 50 names, but maybe 40 of them don't ever go in the portal or
Possibly.
Whatever it might be? I mean, is that a realistic scenario?
Absolutely. Because then the other thing that makes it more difficult is the international piece, right? So you've got, and I'm very happy that we have 3 international players in this roster. I think that's in many ways a big part of the future of college sports. And so, when you add that landscape of people you have to evaluate, it really makes it a pretty daunting task.
What role is that international piece going to play, especially in college basketball going forward?
Oh, I think that, obviously there's going to be quite a bit of talent that comes here. I think it presents options for international players that they wouldn't otherwise have, to make significantly more money coming to college and also to build their brands in a way that they wouldn't be able to do in Europe. And so, I think it's just going to be like just an expanded pool of really, really talented players that we have to really evaluate.
What advantages does Carolina have in that world where you can call someone from Montenegro or whatever, and they know what Carolina is in a way that they may not know many, many, many other schools in America?
Yeah. Well, I'd say that we have great relationships throughout the staff in terms of, international agents and international players and whatnot. Coach Frederick obviously has spent a lot of time scouting internationally, and so he's a tremendous resource. My previous background is, the agency that I had and founded, I merged with a company called You First Sports, which is based in Spain. And so they have, probably 30 international agents all across Europe and Africa. And so being able to tap into that network has, obviously has been helpful thus far, and I hope to be, even more helpful. And then just having relationships with agents that, I was competing with, but, tried to maintain good relationships with everyone. And so, being able to call them and just to have their trust and to be able to get, real inside information is valuable.
What have been, in your experience so far, the biggest difference? You mentioned earlier, big difference in the pro landscape and the college landscape, even though college is certainly creeping more towards professional. What have been those big differences so far that you have noticed?
The one that sticks out the most for me is compliance and just the rules governing the NCAA. I mean, that's a lot to keep track of, right? And so we have a tremendous compliance department. They give excellent guidance, but it's something that you didn't really have to worry about in the pros as much. Obviously, there are rules from the NBPA and the NBA, but the extent of the compliance rules is pretty extensive.
You mentioned a couple times guys who fit in Coach Davis's system. What are kind of those characteristics that you feel like are important that will work well with what he's doing and that he wants to have on his team?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'd want to give too much specific in that regard, but what I'll say is when we were building the roster for this year, obviously there were some things that we wanted to address. We obviously wanted to get bigger across the board. We wanted to, he absolutely loves versatility in the players and being able to play positionless basketball, so that's going to be like a high priority for us. The shooting is a key piece, and I think, we obviously improved that over the course of this roster as well. So, there were certain things that he identified that he wanted, and I think we were able to get those guys this year.
When you spent your life being a Tar Heel fan, is it tough to look at it analytically and think about it, sort of separate the fan part for just a minute?
No, I wouldn't say it's tough. I mean, I think, again, it goes back to the sense of purpose. So it matters in a very deep-seated way, right, for us to be successful and to hit home runs. But I think, just from the past 28 years of doing this, it's a little bit different in that, I never really rooted for one particular team. I was rooting for the success of the clients that I had and the players. Now you're rooting for the success of the team and the individuals on that team. So it's a little bit different in that regard. But I think, separating the analytical piece from the emotional piece is not tough.
If Jim gets thrown out of a game for yelling at the refs, then we'll know he's fully in there now.
Well, that'll probably never happen, but
the rev share. Just your thoughts on that process. Kind of, do you think that is a positive step for long-term what you are trying to do and what Carolina is trying to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, obviously there are various buckets that you can use to compensate college athletes. And so, it's kind of a brand new world. Rev share is the one certainty amongst it. And then the rest of it is people are figuring out as we go and rules are being proposed and developed and whatnot. So, I think a big part of the job also is just, bringing some creativity to the mix in terms of how to best operate within the rules. But rev share obviously is like the certainty.
Sure. You mentioned market value, I think, at one point in time for players. I mean, I know you have personal relationships with guys, and that is important, but do you also kind of have hey, we have X amount for this position, this player is worth Y, so it just doesn't work? I mean, do you have to get kind of that analytical or kind of cold about some decisions? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, there's a process that you go through in terms of identifying, market value for a player. I think the big difference here, as compared to the pro ranks, is in the pro ranks, exactly what every player is making. You can do like really sophisticated market analysis based on knowing every element of the contract and knowing their stats. In college, you don't have that information in terms of, market value, like what other places are paying people on their roster. So a lot of it is you have to kind of figure it out. You have to guesstimate. You have to rely on the relationships you have to get accurate information, as accurate as it can be. So yeah, there's certainly a process that we use in terms of identifying market value and just, trying to come up with competitive offers.
From what you've seen, how much of the financial information that makes its way into the public sphere is anywhere close to being accurate?
I will say there's a lot of inaccuracy that I've seen.
We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, let's leave it there.
Being a college GM is still such a new job, but I think it's something that a lot of people are interested in. If you were describing to someone who said, well, one day I'd like to be a college GM, what would you tell them are the skills you need to be good at this?
Wow. I'd say a sense of collaboration and teamwork. I think that it's something that we have to work together on to be successful. I think an ability to juggle a lot of different responsibilities. And again, I'm developing the job and still learning the job, but, an ability to kind of juggle and just go from, A to B to C. That was something that was really important as an agent as well. You never really kind of wake up and know exactly what your day is going to be like. And I think that's been the case here as well. And I think analytical, I think you've got to be able to, kind of analyze what's happening in the marketplace, come up with creative options as to how you're going to compete. So, a lot of different things I think would be valuable in this role.
I think people at least have a general understanding of when it gets to the off season and you're trying to acquire players and they get all of that. So what do you do? Kind of what's your maybe what you just said? What's your day-to-day like right now? I mean, how does that look when you are still so far away from the actual portion of the year where you're acquiring guys?
Yeah, so you're planning for next year and for the roster and the portal next year. Excuse me. You're having conversations related to high school recruits and high school players. And part of also for the job for me is to try to take as much off Coach Davis's plate as possible. One thing that I've been amazed by or kind of surprised by is the pace of college basketball as compared to the pro basketball landscape. It's very different and seems, much more intense. And just everything that seems to fall on him, he's got to be on all the time. And it's just a very demanding job for him. And so for me, one of my objectives is to really, be in a position to take as much off of his plate so he can really focus on the things that he wants, which is to coach and player development. And that's really where he wants to put his focus.
In what way? What is it about the pace that what kinds of demands are there?
Just the schedule, the schedule in terms of, practices and preparation and, getting ready for that, the recruiting visits, every weekend, and having to be on for those recruits and their families and present the best foot forward in terms of Carolina. That's been the most surprising thing for me in terms of those demands.
Where do you think Carolina does a good job with that? Because it feels like when people come on visits, they are impressed with what they see and hear. How does Carolina do a good job?
I think it's really the brand of Carolina is second to none. I think the tradition really comes through. So when they go and they see the basketball museum or when they walk through the Smith Center and see all the history and all the banners and all the pictures, that's been, people have remarked on that they really feel a sense of the tradition and, the love that people have for the history of Carolina basketball. So that stands out. And then I just think that, again, the staff is just so good and so hardworking and so dedicated and committed that it just really comes through. So it seems very genuine. This used to be in the agency game as well. People would talk about, we're a family. And I think everybody says it. But certain places really reflect it. And I think the same thing goes with, college basketball and recruiting. I think everybody says it's a family atmosphere, but I'm not sure everybody can kind of really convey that. And I think we do a great job of that.
What are you looking forward to here? I mean, Tar Heels are playing in about a month. Yeah. What are you looking forward to?
Focusing on one team, rooting for one team, really dialing into that. I think that's obviously they look great and the chemistry seems great right now. I want to see, how it translates when we actually, start playing games. So I'm really excited about it.
People should go back and listen to your first interview to kind of find out more about your background and how you got to where you are. But in terms of just moving back to Chapel Hill, what have you liked about being in Chapel Hill, a place that, as you talked about before, means so much to you?
It's funny because, again, I can drive around this campus and I have a memory. I probably said this in the first podcast. I have a memory associated with pretty much every brick on this campus. And even though there's been a lot of changes and a lot of development in the area, it still feels very much the same as when I was here and graduated in 1990. So, sometimes on a particularly stressful day, I'll just go walk through campus. And it's just, reconnecting with and identifying with, my history here, the memories here, and just, again, why I love this place.